Hello everyone, thank you for joining this mentorship session on what can you do with a science degree in food and beverage processing. My name is Nicole Galacci and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for this Careers Now mentorship session. Careers Now is Food and Beverage Ontario's workforce development initiative, and we're excited to share mentorship sessions, job fairs, as well as skills training, and you can access all of this at www.CareersNOW.ca. So we definitely encourage you to do that. Go along to the website and create your account. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests today, Veronica Hislop and Danielle Gisela. Both started out with their general science degree and have pursued a career in the food and beverage processing sector. And I'll hand it over to Veronica to kind of explain her career path and journey, and I'll try not to interrupt her and let her speak freely and save my questions. Thanks, Veronica.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So currently, as Nicole alluded to, I did graduate with a general science degree, which I should say specifically was a chemistry degree. So currently right now, I'm actually a PhD student studying molecular science at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson University. And I'm also a podcast host for the FoodGrads podcast, and I do a lot of outreach and things related to the food and beverage industry. But I am on this panel for a reason, because after I graduated, I did enter into the food and beverage industry, working as a quality assurance technician. So in terms of how that actually came to be, when I went to Ryerson, I decided to get a chemistry degree, and I specifically did a co-op degree. So that meant that during my chemistry time, during my second and third year, I did a few co-op terms. So I got to work at a dairy company working in food safety. So I worked as a quality control technician, in which I did the same things that you would do as you would if you're in the full-time position. So that meant going and doing line checks, checking to make sure that the product was made correctly, making sure that there was no food safety issues that I would have saw, and assisting the team in terms of paperwork, helping out with audits, taste testing, which was one of my favorite things, and as well doing lab work. So once I finished that co-op position, I moved into the R&D side of things for another co-op position at the same company, where during that time I helped and assisted with pilot plant trials. So if there was something the R&D team wanted to do, I was that person in the lab with the help of another coworker making it. So we might make yogurt one day, or we might have been making sour cream. So it was a really good experience to expose me to all the different things that someone in R&D would do, as well as actually doing full plant trials in terms of seeing how it works. So I got to work at, go and check it out, for example, when they were doing like a cheese run to see if the new product was going. So really good taste. I knew I loved the food industry from doing those co-op positions. So when I came back to school, I finished off with your standard chemistry degree. So that would involve doing things like titrations, physical chemistry, like none of the things that you would do in an applied setting, but all of those lab skills that I really appreciated from Ryerson is that we had so many lab periods that I felt as soon as I got into the real world, I was like, I've done this all in my lab. So it was perfect. So when I graduated, I knew that I still wanted to go to the food and beverage industry, and I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go, but I did end up getting a quality assurance position. So I did get that right out of school, and I worked at a snack food company doing a lot of the same things I did in my QC position. So as a quality assurance technician, what my role was at a smaller company was to take on the role of QC. So making sure that things were of right quality when it was made, and then as well preparing it to make sure that the food safety occurred, the risks were managed essentially. So that involved, again, going to the production plant, making sure that everything was made correctly, with the lot codes on properly, was the weight properly, was the packaging. So there was a lot of line checks. That was a primary thing. We dealt a lot with allergens, so making sure that the equipment was tested properly between lines when we switched between allergens. So that was a lot of running back and forth because we had so many lines going on, as well working in receiving. So receiving the packaging, receiving to make sure that there was quality standards when they came in, nothing was a food safety risk, and as well helping to prevent and like monitor risks. So coming up with SOPs, making sure that we were prepared for an audit, making sure paperwork was all that. And that took me, that's what I did with the role. And the reason why I went back to do my PhD, though, was that I never quite got over the itch of doing research. I really enjoyed it. So I just thought, well, I'm young, I should do it before I don't want to do it anymore. And I have the opportunity and my life works out. So that's where I am right now. I'm currently studying, again, weird circular world. I'm actually back studying butters, like what I did in QC, totally unintentionally, but I'm essentially looking at the role of processing and compositional changes and how that affects products that are like margin. But there's a lot more to it if we wanted to talk about that, but that's not what we're here for today.
We might dive a bit more into that.
Okay.
Danielle, would you, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could just sort of introduce yourself and your career path.
Hi, I'm Danielle Casella. So I graduated with a general biology degree, but I feel like everyone who had started off in bio or sciences started with biomed. So you can kind of see the transition from biomed to biology degree, which led to pretty much being so unsure of what I can do for my career path, despite, going to career fairs at school where I didn't really think of, not necessarily thinking outside of the box, but I didn't realize the box was much bigger than I thought it'd be. When I graduated, I was introduced to some colleagues of friends of mine who referred me to join Olymel. So I started off as a quality assurance technician with barely any background in food besides one summer as a 16-year-old working in a poultry, working with chicken essentially. So imagine 16 years old working with raw chicken, absolute nightmare for me. But now as I've grown into my role, quality assurance, I was still really unsure of what to do exactly. My manager had mentored me at that time how to apply myself, especially what I've learned in biology and how I'd apply it to, the real world where adults work. That was quite an experience for me. Again, still very unsure. I had left Alimo at some point to work for a nutraceutical company, kind of moving towards pharma. But they had introduced some food products that they've never introduced before, pea proteins and whatnot. So I ended up coming back full circle, working for a food company again, applying HACCP knowledge, kind of did their HACCP planning for them because none of them had worked with foods before. And then just to come back to Alimo and now working as a production supervisor, which I find with my biology background does help with the work outside of working for employees doing HR stuff. Still being to apply what I had learned as quality assurance, especially when we introduced new food products. We were exclusively just bacon before, ready to eat, and then we had introduced other pork byproducts like pate, which had a lot more allergens to them. So being able to apply that made it a lot easier for the department to function.
And what would a typical day as a production supervisor look like for you? A lot of what we do here is sort of explain those career paths because people just aren't aware. You don't know what you don't know, sort of thing.
Exactly. Day-to-day basis is pretty much we would be provided what lines would be running, what we would be cooking, and then creating what we call a manning, see where what lines I can run in terms of availability of employees. We'd run through the night. I would do my checks, check in with QA to make sure we are running optimally while still following food safety.
Excellent. And why did you choose the food industry? I know before we went live, you said my favorite words, which, I've heard lots of times, which is you wished FoodGrads existed when you were still at school because you didn't really have, an idea of what to do in the food industry. But what made you choose the food industry? And maybe, Veronica, you can jump in after because that's how we met as well and kind of share your experience there as well.
I was never super academic, which is a little odd for someone who went into STEM. I find that I was better when I had applied myself. So I find the food industry lets you be a little bit more hands-on. Like research is fun and it's great. And Veronica, I wish I could do a little bit more research, but I find that being able to apply my knowledge, but also kind of train that into other people, make it a little bit more accessible for them. I think that's what the food industry had provided me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I'll go. I knew I kind of wanted to go into food a really long time. I actually originally had wanted to go into the food science program at the University of Guelph or just any food science program. But during the time that I had applied, I got waitlisted on everything. So I'd actually put Ryerson as I had some extra slots on my high school thing. So they accepted me and I was like, okay, I guess that's where I'm going because I knew food science was just an application of chemistry in a degree. Of course, it's a lot more than that. I was made aware of food from like the Food Network. They did a lot of like food science, Alton Brown, Food Network Challenge. And even there was a show back when I was in high school called Recipe to Riches, where they essentially took home cooks and you could submit recipes for President's Choice. And then they would work with product developers and it was like a competition and whoever had the best ingredient or best dish that week and it was most available that it could go to supermarket shelves was the winner of the episode. And then it kind of exposed me like, oh, this is product development. Like this is like a legitimate like career. So that really solidified I wanted to go into it. And in terms of finding my first co-op position, I still wanted to go into food and I was trying to network wherever I could and ended up finding my first position from my boyfriend's mother's boss's cousin. So like I always tell people, just tell everyone, you never know who knows who. And I think that's really big in the food industry as well, because you'll start to go, like I was having a conversation with someone that works in the States, and he's like, oh, do you know this person? I noticed on LinkedIn. And I was like, how do you know? Like, how do you know them? So that's one thing I realized. But in terms of wanting to stay in food, and then as well, I got involved in FoodGrads as well. Oh my gosh, I do too much. But I decided that I wanted to stay in food once I realized about the people. So as soon as I went into the manufacturing plant, I started to realize how niche everything was. Like when I went to go on do QC and I went to do the production lines, I got to talk with everyone, just, the quick, like, hi, how are you? But it was still really nice because I really felt I got to know everyone. And as I kept going, I really felt there was this sense of community, despite it being a manufacturing field. And over time, you could, be with someone else and being like, oh, how was your weekend? How are your kids doing? And then you really start to know people. And I think that's what made me stay. And then as well, getting involved with FoodGrads, I realized that there's this whole community and there's a lot of giving within it. And I just really liked that feeling. And I also enjoyed the fact that, everyone has to eat. And I think that it's a very nurturing thing, being able to go in the grocery store and say, I was involved in making this, or I checked the lot code, or any of those things. It's really cool when you can look at a product and list off like every person who was working that day.
I still do that thing where I'll go to the grocery store and look at packs of bacon, and like I will look at the EST number and be like, oh, that's our stuff. Oh, that's nice it looks. Look, we made this.
Yeah, I used to love doing that. Oh, it's so fun. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because I just realized I was on mute. We do a lot of school events. And one of the things that we notice is when we say to young people, sort of the high school age, what jobs are you aware of? What would you want to do in food and beverage processing? They will talk about the farm and farmers and that end of things, or they'll talk about becoming a chef. Or a baker, and it happens. It's not just one or two. It's like literally all of them. And then when you mention the different positions that are available in the industry, all the different options, it's like they had no idea that there were so many things you could do. So I always find it really, really interesting to kind of hear people that from yourselves in the industry that what inspired you, because like you said, Veronica, you started watching the shows and the cooking brought you in, but it was like it was just the path you took. So I often say, to your point about the restaurant side, you can make dinners for 50 people in the restaurant on a certain night, or you can make food for the masses and see it on the grocery store shelf, and they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. So I'm interested, now that you've both been in the industry, what would you say if your friends ask you, like, what's the biggest misconception? I mean, I know you mentioned raw chickens. I mean, it's never that desirable. There are elements in food that are needed. We all want to eat, we all want to eat these products, but there's a side of it that maybe isn't as attractive. But what would you say, Danielle, is the biggest misconception now that you've worked in the industry?
I think that the biggest misconception for me, at least from what I've experienced, is that not everything is so nitty gritty. Like when I was 16, I walked into a poultry processing plant and I walked out like feeling really, really queasy. But like we have to realize, like, these places are some of the cleanest places. They have to be it, right? But these are like the cleanest places, and the amount of work is put into, amount of organization that's been put into it. It's not just you walk in, you put chicken or bacon in a bag, and then you go. There's a lot of step-by-step testing every point of the way, how much you can apply to it. It's crazy. Just going from farm to table, that everything in between, especially for processed food, is absolutely insane. And I think people take that for granted, and again, misconception that everything's a little gross or it has to come directly from the farm.
Yeah.
You want to add to that?
Well, I definitely agree. I feel when I'm thinking about misconceptions, it's almost like there wasn't misconceptions because I feel no one talks, like it feels like no one actually knows what happens in a manufacturing. So there's no misconceptions because no one actually talks about it. And the only thing I can really think of is just the misconceptions of like product labels and such. So, when people talk about it, they'll be like, "Oh, look at this ingredient deck. It's so large. Why is this here? Why is this here? I can't pronounce this term." And it's just the scientific name for a lot of these. Like, it's just the scientific name. I mean, water is just a common name for dihydrogen oxide or like something, I don't even use it off by that. So for me, a lot of the misconceptions when I was speaking to others was that like there's a purpose for these ingredients on the food label, and or the food industry is not out to kill you. Like, if anything, it's trying to nourish you. It's there's standards in place. And to add on to how clean it was, like I didn't realize how regulated it was until I was involved. Like I had no idea there was SQF certifications, ISO certifications, BRC. There's the government ones. Like there's multiple layers of it. And that really shocked me to know like how regulated it is. And sometimes I wonder, it's amazing how many people are involved to keeping it clean, but sometimes it almost feels like you could go to a restaurant and there's a higher chance of getting sick because there's less individuals present to clean it, as opposed to a factory that run a check every like 2 hours, do this, do that. And I think is just that the fact there's just so many people involved, and the fact that we're not getting as sick as much. I mean, there's always risk, and of course there's things can happen and there's bad players, but I just couldn't get over like how many people are involved in making the food.
Well, yeah, we're lucky. I think we're very lucky that we get to access safe, healthy food. You mentioned SQF, and so I was going to ask Danielle, you mentioned HACCP. For those that aren't familiar with the term, would you mind explaining what that is?
Is that for me or Danielle?
Well, Danielle, if you want to answer, but Veronica, if you want to go ahead, like either whoever's most comfortable, go ahead.
Maybe you can go.
Pretty much these are standards that we uphold. HACCP is kind of, I believe, a little bit more general, just for critical points and following food safety. And I believe SQF is standards so that we are able to produce and sell products. Mm-hmm. It's been a while when I've been involved in SQF.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, like every single plant at least in Canada, has to have some kind of HACCP plan, so it's mandated by the government. But SQF is safe quality food, so it's chosen by the food factory what third-party auditor body they have. So essentially, you could choose between GFSI, SQF, like they're all food safety standards, but I don't know the nuances between the different ones, why someone would choose one over the other.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot there. I just think it's so interesting because I'm an HR person in the food industry. So I feel it's just fascinating stuff because people don't know this. And again, going out to the schools and holding up a ketchup bottle and saying, someone makes the ketchup inside and the ingredients, etc. But someone makes the label, and someone, has to make sure the label all makes sense. Like there's so many different career paths that are involved in getting that ketchup to the grocery store and off the shelf. So and another thing that I always tell young people is our industry is pretty recession proof. Like I think the pandemic proved that a lot of industries really suffered, and this industry was doing very, very well. Everyone, myself included, got to go to the grocery store and reverse and open our trunks and have food put in, but there was a team of people like yourself, Danielle, and Veronica, back when you were working outside doing that, that were getting that food to the grocery store shelves. So I think, I was kind of like, these people are heroes. Our industry is full of heroes. Not only do they keep their food safe, but, you're the ones that were out there keeping the food coming so that it was able to be accessible. So, I think that's a cool thing to tell young people as well. Danielle, you mentioned you worked at Olymel. How did you find your first job? Like what advice would you give to young people looking for jobs and maybe looking for a co-op or full-time, whatever experience you've had?
So I got into Olymel kind of through another weird connection. My dad's co-worker's wife's friend or something like that. Um, Honestly, every time I saw her at work, I thanked her every day for referring me and giving me that opportunity. But it's not just about who you know; it's being about open-minded. Again, every town or every city has some sort of food manufacturing plant in it, whether it's like right in the city or right outside the city. It's being about being open-minded. Again, like I went through my academic career thinking I had to stick directly to academia or medical school. Those are my only two options. And when I entered the food industry, that I realized there's a lot more to what I can do um, with a science degree than just being purely academic. My manager had mentored me every once in a while to kind of guide me as someone who also held a science degree and now was a manager for one of the two largest like baking plants in Canada. Um, yeah, just being open minded, kind of again participating in FoodGrads, for example, who kind of open up these doors and kind of make you realize that there's a lot more in what you can do, and your the possibilities are just endless.
Mhm.
Do you have anything to add, Veronica, to that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I did a lot of, so I was involved with FoodGrads since my third year because I did want to get exposed, and I did do a lot of the networking events, and I did speak to a lot of individuals. I mean, obviously I met Nicole, and I was, it was really good to put on my resume that I was able to, I've written blog posts, which might not seem like a lot, but it added something for someone who had a general chemistry degree. It's like, what could make me stand out? It is funny, though, that despite everything I did with FoodGrads, the way I did get my first job was just through applying on a job posting. So, I mean, there is a place for that as well, of course, networking, but sometimes it's just applying. And as well, just being open, like you said, open-minded to opportunities. Like I did do shift work. So that is one thing that is very common, obviously, in the food industry, where a lot of plants run 24 hours. Mine was particularly fortunately like Monday to Friday, but I did have to switch 2 weeks in the afternoon, 2 weeks in the morning, which was fine. I mean, I will admit I'm a morning person, so staying up till 1 for some people, it's like, oh, that's nothing. But for me, it was actually quite difficult. But I did find it just through applying, but having more things to add on my resume was really good. And a lot of the skills as well, even just in school, your labs, at least for me, were so important in making me feel comfortable when I actually did go and work, because it was a language, so to say, that you could speak to the in the interview. Because I had been asked, like, have you ever done any microbiology? Have you done any tests? Have you done any titrations? Have you done swabbing? Like, do you understand the principles behind it? And that's one thing I did learn when I graduated was you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you know a lot more without even realizing that it's not a language that everyone knew. Like, having a science background can allow you, especially going into food safety, you're able to better articulate, oh, I know why this bacteria is bad. You didn't just say, oh, bacteria is bad, because I feel maybe if I talked to my mother, for example, she knew it, but it's not like from a scientific standpoint. So having that scientific background can help you when you go into these roles. And, it also puts you to a certain level type of thinking. So the scientific method, being able to make a hypothesis, think things through, like, here's a variable, I'm going to change all these things. Like, your labs would teach you these without maybe you even realizing it. So I know I talk a lot about my labs. I did learn a lot of coursework. Unfortunately, I did not use quantum physics in the food industry, but I did do a lot of my lab work was probably, if you can take as many lab courses as you can, I would encourage that, because I just found, like maybe Danielle felt with a lot of the hands-on learning, if you're more of an applied person, STEM does have a lot of opportunities for it, even though it's with some difficult courses.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you said you weren't as academic, but you took a STEM course. So how do you relate your science degree to working, the jobs that you've had, Danielle? Like what is that correlation? Like you were able to use your hands. Could you explain that a little bit more?
So there were some aspects where I was in the lab, especially for pork and bacon. A lot of preservatives, a lot of nitrates go into it. So we did do a lot of salinity testing, and it was a lot easier for me to like work the machines and kind of know how to do it a little bit easier than my coworkers who didn't have a science degree. Because again, like Veronica says, I already knew the scientific method. Um, so taking what I knew in labs and in classes and kind of applying it more with the scientific vernacular and stuff like that, and kind of knowing not just how to do things, but why I had to do these tests and why I had to follow this certain procedure, just made it a lot easier to go further into the job.
What are your career aspirations? Like, what do you potentially see as the next step for you?
I would like to go more into like the management side of quality. I do like this aspect of the job and being able to kind of not necessarily command, but kind of navigate, how the company is running in terms of sticking with, HACCP and other regulatory bodies. And at some point, maybe do consultation, help other companies kind of achieve that, especially smaller startups and whatnot.
That's cool. Yeah. Anything to add, Veronica, before I move on now?
Yeah, in terms of career aspirations, I've always been the type of person who believes in it's hard to predict what you want to do in the future. And I think that a lot of opportunity comes from being good at what you do. So being able to do things well currently. So that's why I'm very much, I think you've, if anyone's watched any of these other mentorship series, that a lot of people didn't realize they would end up in the food industry or in their particular role. And I think it's in part because you can do so much navigation and you can move from step to step. And I believe that it's good to be really good at what you can do. And then you start to get noticed. And that's how opportunities come, because people notice, hey, they're really good at this. They would probably be also well suited for this. So I don't really know what I'm going to do after I graduate, but I think that is okay.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's too much stress and too much pressure on people. But having said that, I will say once you're in the food industry, in my experience as a recruiter for 10 years, people don't leave. Like once they're in, which is nice. And I think there's lots of opportunity to move around. And, we're talking about someone with a science degree, but really, we've seen people come in as a QA, maybe go into regulatory, then they end up in marketing. It really does depend, like Veronica said, on what you like, what you're good at. People tend to do well in things they do like, and like you say, rise to the top in that respect. I did get a question come in from Roshni. She asked, does any certification like HACCP or SQF help in getting into the food industry? My quick answer is yes. Anything you can do prior would definitely help, but I'll pass it over to the two of you. Danielle, do you have any thoughts there? Any advice?
Going into the food industry, it's helpful, but just a quick tip, at least from my experience, getting into the food industry and then getting your HACCP or SQF certification on kind of their dime, because they would, most companies would like to promote, further education of their employees. So a lot of them will pay for courses and stuff like that. And I was signed up for like other mentorship programs to help me further in my food industry and my QA career. That was signed up for me by my manager.
That's awesome. That's great that the company offered that to you, because I agree. They do want to, and more companies want to upskill. It's the way you keep people. It's the way you motivate people. You feel valued if they're putting time and energy and money into your career. What about you, Veronica? Anything to add?
I know that I was going to say pretty much what you said, Danielle. I know that, of course, it will help you stand out. Maybe if you are struggling finding a job and maybe it's been a little while, maybe that might be the opportunity to take it. I know that my company as well did, they signed me up for HACCP training. So a lot of companies will train you because they want you to know how it applies to theirs as well. Of course, self-promotion. I know I had a podcast episode where somebody spoke specifically on this, but I can't remember what episode it was now, but she spoke about specifically this at length. So I'll try to remember that. Maybe it'll pop up. But I mean, anything that you can do to stand out, I think is always good. There's other ways if you don't necessarily want to spend money, because I know these certifications can get expensive and such. Although they are good. I mean, there's always opportunities even for, maybe Nicole can talk more about it, but even just sharing scientific knowledge on LinkedIn and all that, it might just be enough to get you noticed. And then once you're in, have the company to sponsor you.
Mm-hmm. I would add that we have 14 free courses on CareersNOW. They are free. They range from an hour to, I think the most is 4 hours. They're actually 15 courses that are available and all free, and you can add them to your resume, and it definitely helps you. I mean, I think if you're a job seeker and you don't have any experience in the food industry at all, anything you can do to gain that experience, to get your foot in the door, is definitely worthwhile. I mean, that would be my best advice. We actually were at an event recently that a lot of people were saying, I've applied, I'm not getting anything. But I think a lot of people will focus on the job that they want, their dream job in the organization. And sometimes you need to take something for the interim just to get your foot in the door, especially if it's a company that you are really interested in working with. Take anything, take something that gets you in, let them see your work ethic, your passion. What would you add to that? Either one of you.
Most quality techs that I knew came directly from the production floor. So whether or not they had a science degree, getting even just from like the very bottom and getting in, you do get noticed for your work ethic, like Nicole said. But once they see you with your work ethic and when you apply, they see that you have a science degree, that kind of makes you stand out. And a lot of the companies do hire internally for the most part, because they do prefer someone who kind of knows their ins and outs of day to day. But to have that science degree kind of gives you that extra boost that you need.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know, like you said, I know a lot of individuals who did work on the production floor and then went to food safety or went to production manager. And, I didn't do that side. I mean, I did go straight to quality, but I could see why, especially, not only is it the work ethic, but as well, you just know the inner workings. So imagine then switching into QC or switching into product development or switching to a lead hand like even starting from the production floor. There's so many opportunities that you can go from that opportunity. So I think we should also speak more to how well, and like becoming a machine operator, that is not that is a skill, being able to troubleshoot, the amount of learning that you get from being on the floor. It's not just packaging, moving boxes. I mean, that might be a part of your day, but then there's also feeding the machine, figuring out, well, why is the sound making this, working with like mechanics. And these are all things that you can move up within that role, become a plant manager, become a lead hand, or it can be applied that it's useful for food safety, or it can be for research and development, or even marketing, because now you know how it works and that gives you a new perspective.
Yeah, when I first started as a QA, because I started directly as a QA from outside, barely knew how like anything worked. I was trained by like senior QAs, but I did most of my learning from the production floor.
Yeah.
Asking, supervisors and production employees how this works, just so I kind of understood better of not only what I have to do, but what I had to look for. And especially for materials was just like a huge thing, such a huge issue, especially for like larger machines. Speaking to mechanics and production supervisors made it so much easier to kind of judge and know what to do when like something does go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know when I was in my first role as well, I was going around and asking, we have our standards that we would follow, but when it came to something more like appearance or taste, I was going to the lead hand for the shift, and I was like, is this good? And I was asking them at the beginning and really like asking questions because their experience, many of these people have been, professionals have been doing it for like 10 plus years. And I'm like, they're going to know a lot more than me. So using that to your knowledge, and if you can come from the production floor up, you're going to know the intricacies, and you're going to know why the sugar is too sticky, and it's you can get a lot of knowledge from it.
One of the things that we tell young people really at an early age is you got to, really hone your soft skills. And that is a buzzword that everybody uses. And I think once you are, you go through university and you hear about soft skills, and then you're putting your resume together, whether it's for a co-op opportunity, a summer job, or it's for that first entry level position. There are a ton of different soft skills, that you hear about: strategic thinking, communication, all these things. Maybe Veronica, you want to go first. What would you say is a soft skill that you think is important, and can you apply it? Like, why was it important? Like, why are you using it daily when you were in the production floor, on the production floor?
I feel like I would say it's two at one, because I think they're just as equally important. Of course, there's the communication piece, which I'll lead into, but first it's the curiosity. And speaking on to what we were saying is asking questions, but it's also about asking good questions. It's about asking specific questions that you can get good answers out of, and being able to then know how to direct the question to an individual. So that moves into the communication side. So how I would speak to my QC manager would be different than how I spoke to a plant manager, a plant worker. They're not going to tell me that the humidity is at 15% and that's the optimal way. They're going to say, well, when the air feels like this, the best temperature to work is at this, and it has this feeling. And being able to articulate that or for them to articulate it to you, and for you to process it and then ask ongoing questions, understanding that. But then as well, on the flip side, if there was maybe, again, speaking from the food safety side, being able to take technical knowledge and saying it in a more approachable way for everyone. So just coming in and saying like, this is wrong, you can't do this, like that's not going to help. People aren't going to like you if you come in. Of course, there's a level of, you have to be, this is kind of the way it is, but also being in a way that, well, why would I have to shut the line down because I have a production goal today? Like, why am I going to do that? And then being able to articulate it in a way that they understand, and then you can work together. So it's really being able to ask good questions, and then as well, being able to translate them and translate your knowledge, and then translating it back to yourself.
One surprising one that I now hold very, very dear to my heart is record keeping. Really good record keeping is the backbone of the food industry, especially when you work with like ready to eat products and stuff like that. Being able to record well of like any issues or any deviations goes a really, really long way, because not only let's say, like for finances, as a production supervisor, why our finances has deviated so much? Well, if you can see, like on this day, this is what happened. These are the records. These are the paperwork that can provide all of that. Or let's say we have a product recall. We'll know why, or it'll be a lot easier to investigate going by off of those records. And like any food safety issues, with a keen eye, you can kind of tell what happened just from paperwork alone.
That's a good one. That's good. Yeah. And furthermore, analyzing the data, that's definitely, there is so much in terms of technology that to capture more data going forward, but we need people in the industry that can analyze it and make sense of it, and then reiterate it to people so that they can actually use it wisely and in order to make a difference. So that's a great a great example. We are drawing close to our time, but before I let you go, I wanted to ask, what's sort of the top 3 pieces of advice you would give to a new grad that's interested, or maybe they aren't interested in the food industry, but we, our job here is to inspire. We want to encourage people, the next generation of food and beverage industry professionals. What would be your top 3 pieces of advice? Either one of you can choose to go first.
3 pieces is a lot, Nicole.
The standard's high over here, Nicole.
I know. I have faith in you both. That's the thing. You're scientists.
Maybe we can go back and forth. Maybe that'll help us.
Yeah,
we'll
do that.
Okay.
Problem solving, another soft skill.
Well, I guess I'll go first, just from the student perspective, and it's almost in a way to prepare you for an interview or prepare you for a job. To the record keeping piece, like I always thought journaling helped, like keeping track of some difficulties that I had in my life. Like if you can talk about a problem solving that you had in your hospitality job working at McDonald's. I mean, I talked about that in my interview. So it's more of a specific advice, but just journal and keep track of things that you have in your daily life, even if it's like jotting it down, because you might forget the ways that you problem solve something. And then just by looking at the notes, it can really jog your memory. And even today I use that, and maybe in the future I'll plan to use some of these notes. So yeah.
That's great. That's great advice.
I think I've reiterated this a few times now. It's just being open-minded. Keep your mind open. You don't have to think outside of the box. You don't have to bend over backwards to find something. It's looking at job postings, and even if you feel overqualified for it, go for it, because you are getting your foot in the door. It might get a little tedious over time, just applying to the same thing over and over again, but persistency is key, and being open-minded about it is very helpful.
When you were at school, when you were actually doing your science degree, Danielle, what were you encouraged to do? I'm just curious. I meant to ask you this earlier, but can you recall like the advice you were getting at the time from school, or were you not getting any advice? Like, were you just like, I don't know what I'm going to do?
I feel like I wasn't getting advice directly. I was just assumed to go to these like networking events and be expected to kind of know what to do from there on. But then those networking events, especially for STEM, were specifically just speaking to professors who have just stayed in their field for so many years, that I felt a little trapped almost, where like, I've spent all these years, developed my passions and whatnot, only to find out that these are my only options. So it was hard to realize that there was so much more that I can do with what I had.
Do you have another nugget of advice, Veronica, that was from your perspective?
What comes to mind is it kind of goes hand in hand, is just learning how to manage stress, because we didn't speak about it today. And although I do like the food industry, and I still do, they're very fast moving, and there can be a lot of stress that goes on, and there can be a lot of ways that you can get very caught up in, when things are going wrong, they can feel like your whole life's going wrong. So just being able to talk with others that you work with, making sure that you're not keeping all these thoughts in, you never know what comment could have helped the team. So just being open, like speaking about it. And then as well, just, if you have a bad day, being able to either, maybe you can't always leave it at work, but finding ways to decompress, because you can get stuck in a loop when you go home thinking about something that happened. So just really finding ways to manage that stress.
That's great. Yeah. I think that applies everywhere, like to everything.
Yeah.
If you can, that's awesome advice. I know I put you on the spot, so if you don't have any more, I guess my very last question will be, is there anything you would have done differently I know you're both early in your career, so this question often for people sort of 10 years plus, they tend to have good answers here. But is there anything that you might have done differently? I guess that does conjure up a piece of advice for some who maybe will take what you're going to say and do something different in their path. Can you think of anything at this point, Veronica?
I know this is very left field, but I would have just wanted to try a skilled trade early on, or some kind of exposure to a skilled trade. I love science, I love learning, but I do wonder maybe if I was exposed earlier on, maybe I would have liked a skilled trade. Maybe I would have liked to be a welder. I know I could still obviously do that now, but I guess making sure that you explore other things that, we talk about, with Danielle was saying, like going into the medical field was kind of pushed upon with science, but maybe considering, maybe not even college or university bound from that, or doing an apprenticeship. So I guess finding a way to make sure that, of course, you can move around in the food industry, but like a skilled trade isn't something that you kind of move departments. So yeah, I guess it would be just explore different options, talk to different people if you can. But yeah, I would have liked to see if I liked skilled trades.
For me, I think I would have probably taken a lot more like lab courses specifically, not necessarily food industry related, but a lot more lab courses. I feel like that expands your opportunities a little bit more when it comes to the food industry, and taking as many like small certification courses, whether it's like applied trade or just like a public speaking course, stuff like that. That kind of, I didn't have to grow into that role so painfully and for so long if I had like these like little tools that have been a lot helpful.
Well, I think you speaking today is going to help a lot of people, right? Like this is the goal, that we can take other people's experiences and talk about them, and hopefully people that are finding this video will take some of this stuff on and join the industry and have some little nuggets of wisdom to come in with. I think it's important to share these stories. Everyone's experience is different, so that's the number one thing I always say as well. Like that we've done this. Veronica's done it through the podcast. I think you would agree. Everybody's path has been different, so there's not a one size fits all. You don't have to have it all figured out. And we're thrilled that through Careers Now and FoodGrads, we're able to provide these kind of sessions and hopefully provide some great advice for people just starting out in their career. And we are happy to answer any other questions you might have. I'm sure Danielle wouldn't mind if you do have questions after the event. We can connect you, and Veronica and I are always around through FoodGrads and Careers Now to answer any specific questions. And we'd encourage you to, as I said earlier, go to the Careers Now page. You'll find a ton of information there and career advice, as well as those micro credentials, those courses that we were mentioning, we were talking about. So add those to your resume and put your best foot forward there. And of course, visit the FoodGrads website as well, where we have all our career profiles and ebooks and podcasts and wonderful information for you to grow and learn. And thank you for your time today. Thank you, Danielle and Veronica, for joining me. As always, I can't do these sessions without people like yourself willing to come and join me. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for having us.